Hey, everybody, welcome. This is Steve Cady here at Bowling Green State University with our Doctorate in Organization Development Program. See what else. Let's see here. Okay. Later. Can you all hear me okay? All right, good. So my computer was just checking. So we're here at Bowling Green State University, and we're here with cohort 7, our 7th cohort in our doctoral program. Everybody wave, say hi, cohort 7. You see them there? Yay! And we're also here with people from all over the world that are joining us to learn with and from Don on his topic today. We're so glad that you're here, Don. Bowling Green sponsors this. Nexus for Change sponsors this, and I get the pleasure of being the host along with other people who come in and guest hosts and so forth. We also have the Academy of Management's Organization Development and Change Division. So David Bright, thank you for your sponsorship and your support of that. We also have others that have been asking and wanting to partner into the Change 2025. So that's really great. So the word is getting out. People really want to be a part of this, and we want to be as inclusive and bring everybody together as possible to create a great learning experience for everybody. And so with that, we are also going to have the first hour here with Don, focused on Don sharing his story around the topic that you all are here for. And then the last 30 minutes, so it's 90 minutes, the last 30 minutes, we're going to do a deep dive into OD&C, and we have 5 questions. And Don's going to be speaking a lot to those questions during his hour anyway, but we're going to get a concise kind of response from him around them, because I'm working with David Bright and the Academy, Danny Manford and Ignacio Pavez, and we're working to do research around some foundational questions so that we can begin to codify even more and build on Don's work and others' work around helping to establish a foundation and a professional platform for the field of OD&C, which is needed now more than ever. And so we'll be doing that the last 30 minutes. And so Don, Don and I met Don, God, I can't remember actually the first time we met Don, but I know that I met you through a few things, but I was at a conference and I saw Don and I said, Don, let's have some dinner. We were at a conference. He was like, you want to do anything? I wasn't doing anything. We went and had dinner. And then the next conference, ran into each other. We had dinner again. And so we started having dinner at these conferences spontaneously. And then it's led to working on an article together, working on a chapter for his book, and just a variety of other things, and just some great conversations and mentorship. And so Don brings with him grace, wisdom, keen intellect, and just a passion that is rivals the ever-ready bunny, if you will. And so with that, Don, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Steve. I'm very humbled to be part of this list of speakers you've put together, and including Dave Coughlin, who I see is here, and very thankful for you, Steve, in putting this program together. I honestly think it's one of the best that I've seen in my career. And thanks to your staff, Lisa and Heather and Theo. Theo had a case in one of my books that came out in 2024. And David, as I mentioned, has one coming out in my new book, which will be out, I think, in February of 2026. The title of my session is What I've Learned About OD&C, Reflections from Over 55 Years of Real World OD. Actually, it's actually been more than that. It would probably be closer to 60 years. And that, of course, kind of dates me, but you have to understand, I got into this field when I was about 10 years old. So I've been around for quite a while. In preparing you for what I'm going to say, I want to share 3 things. One is, and you said this, Steve, I love this field. I mean, I just have a passion for OD&C. You and I, being in this field, have an opportunity to have an impact on a world that really needs impact. I mean, we have the knowledge and the skills to prepare organizations where people can flourish. So that's one thing. I love this field. Secondly, my specialty and I hope maybe my contribution to the field is that basically I'm just a specialist in state-of-the-art common sense. So I don't really have a lot of profound things to say, but I've devoted my career in studying everything I could find about OD&C, talking to leaders throughout the field, surveying leaders, doing everything I could to learn about this field, but then to distill it into very practical common sense. And you might not think that's a great contribution, but common sense is not so common. If it was, organizations would be run well. Leaders would know how to lead. It would be a different world if you and I actually practiced state-of-the-art common sense. That, by the way, is not an easy task. That means I have to distill a lot of information and then somehow communicate it, whether it's in books or articles or training or educating students. Somehow I have to be able to communicate in a way that they would nod their head and just say, well, that really makes sense. I can go out and do that. I remember, Steve, when I was on the adjunct faculty of your Master's in OD program for many years at Bowling Green. And that seemed to be the issue that most students wanted to know the most about. To them, it was a complicated field. It hadn't been explained very well, apparently, to them. And they just needed some common sense principles to get excited about the field. The third thing that you need to know about me is that my major influence in this field has been my wonderful wife, Anna. Steve knows Anna. David Coughlin knows Anna. Theo knows Anna. She is just an absolute marvel. And she's been involved in my teaching, my consulting. I don't know what the count is, but I know I've worked with somewhere around 200 organizations, from Fortune 500 to international to little mom and pop kind of organizations. She's been involved in my writing. In fact, I've made her a co-author of the last 2 books. And she's just an inspiration to be around. So with that, I will give you a little background about how I got into the field. And that'll help you understand why I'm so excited about this field. I was in the doctorate program at the University of Southern Cal. And interestingly, at that time, they didn't have any OD people. They became a giant in the field of OD when Ed Lawler and Warren Bennis and so many people got on their faculty. But at the time, there weren't any. But I was manager of management development at Hughes Aircraft. And on my staff, it turned out that most of my staff members were Ph.D. students at UCLA. That was one of the early pioneers in the field of OD, and it was just getting started. The pioneers were beginning to share the major concepts and so on, and these people were all excited about this new field. And so I started learning from them and, interestingly enough, doing most of my research being at USC, actually at UCLA, because they had all these great professors like Bob Tannenbaum who were involved in OD. And so I got more and more excited about it the more I learned, and introduced one of the first OD programs for a company at Hughes Aircraft while I was there. And you'd be interested to know it wasn't a success. So my first effort didn't work that well. What happened was that they had an engineer who also had an MBA, and back at that time, that wasn't that common. And he ran a major division of Hughes Aircraft. And so we said, we've got this new field called organization development. We can really help you build your organization into a very strong, successful organization. Could we work with you? And he said, oh, yeah, sure. So we did an assessment, and it turned out that he was the major problem. And that was a tricky one, to kind of work with. But make a long story short, as we got his leaders together and kind of change champions throughout his group together and came up with a plan for change, he was not very happy to find out that his organization wasn't perfect, because that's pretty much what his reputation was in Hughes. And so he ended our program rather abruptly. So my first effort actually was not all that successful. But the more I learned about the field, the more I thought, this is where I want to spend my life. And so I was very fortunate, since it was a field just beginning to be built, to get involved with a lot of leaders in the field. And I got asked to be the second editor of the Academy of Management OD newsletter. Achilles Armanakis was the first. By the way, I might add, and David knows Wayne Boss well, Wayne became the third editor and is still the editor. It's just amazing. I don't even know how many years that is, David, but I bet it's been at least 40 years or more that he's been editor of the Academy of Management OD newsletter, and then was fortunate to be the director of the OD division, and then do lots of research where I basically surveyed leaders in the field. So I got to know and learn from all these people. So long story short, my career in OD has been like a kid in a candy store. I'm the guy that just happened to be around with all these movers and shakers and inspiring people, and then to get to spend my whole career involved with all these people and to learn from them, and to be able to use what I knew to help organizations and prepare leaders to build healthy, high-performing organizations. It has just been a thrill of a lifetime. And so I had an opportunity to go to a University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, that was fairly young itself. And because of that, I got to, the moment I got here, actually got to develop the first OD program for undergraduates and graduates. And interestingly enough, I've been there 55 years, and I'm still teaching that course. It's still a big draw in our college, both of them at the undergraduate and the MBA level. And so all of our management majors at the undergraduate level, and literally all of our MBA students for 55 years have heard about OD. So that's my background in the field, and will give you some ideas why I'm so excited about it. So what I'm going to share is 10 things that I've basically learned over the years about organization development and change. And then I'm going to share a live example of how to apply it, based on some very fortunate interactions I've had with Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Ford. And so much has been written about Alan. He's a legendary leader, very well known not only for his leadership skills, but his skills in building culture. But not many, well, in fact, no one really wrote about his skills in transforming organizations. And so I've been working with Alan for quite some time to put all that together. And so what you're going to be is actually the first group to ever see this list of what he did to transform Ford. And by the way, if you're interested, I just found out yesterday it's going to be published in the OD Journal, I think in February, if you're interested in reading about that. So I'm first I'm going to share these ideas, then I'm going to share a live example. And then we'll get to this part about the deep dive that Steve has with some questions about OD. What I'd like for you to do, though, as I go with each of the 10 items, if you have questions or comments, send it to chat. And Steve, if you could follow that after each item, I'll pause for a minute and see if you happen to have a real good question that you could ask that I could respond to. So everybody ready to go? Okay, let's go to the first item. So go to the next slide. And so the first item is the honor and responsibility of being in a field that can make a significant difference. And the point about that is you and I should really take seriously the privilege that we have had of learning about organization development and change. I don't know if you realize this, but it's really the only field that was founded purely to improve the health and effectiveness of organizations. That's what we study. Those are the skills we learn. And imagine the impact that that's had across the world. So when David and I got started, this was more kind of a US kind of a deal. Now, as you know, it's spread all over the world. And even in this session, we have people from all over the world. And it's not just impacting typical companies, that type of organization, it's impacting whole cities, whole countries. I mean, this is a field that has caught on, and we have so much to offer the world. And boy, what a time for us to be involved in applying what we know. I mean, the world's broken. Organizations are broken. You could not imagine, well, maybe you could, what I hear from my students about the organizations that they're in, and they're broken. A lot of them are toxic, out of control. Boy, you and I have been blessed with a field and some concepts that can literally turn organizations around. So I hope that you take seriously how privileged you are. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in the doctorate program that the people sitting by you, Steve, are in. And I will tell you, and I think Steve has done this marvelous job of putting together the doctorate program. It's the best that I've seen ever anywhere in the world for people that are interested in OD. I just can't believe the exposure that you students are exposed to. It's just absolutely incredible. So I'll stop with that one. That's the first one. I don't know if anyone wants to write anything in chat. I'd be glad to respond to that. If not, I'll go to the next one. Anybody write in, Steve?
That a field infused with democratic principles.
So was that just a statement, I guess, or?
No question, just a statement.
Okay. Well, I mean, think about it. We're in an honorable profession. I mean, what are we really teaching? We're teaching leaders how to build these organizations that bring out the best in people, teams, and organizations. And what could be more fun than that? And we're not always successful, by the way. It's not an easy task, but that's our mission. Okay, so I'll go to the next one. Understanding OD&C from OD to ODC to ODC and T. I don't know if those of you that have been involved in OD for a while have thought about this, but it's sort of good news and bad news. It's caused a lot of confusion in the field because we started out being organization development. Then I think it was about 1988, 1989, Gene Bartunek and Bob Quinn started talking about adding a C to OD because change was starting to become very, very important and popular. And you've all seen the statistics, whether you agree with them or not. 70% or more of major change efforts tend to fail. We don't, whatever it is, it's a large percent because very few leaders know how to manage change. And you can even do the right things the wrong way and it's not going to work. And so change had emerged as a major issue in OD. It was always, by the way, part of OD, but it just became more and more important in the organization literature. So the Academy of Management decided to change their name from OD to OD&C. I'm going to use the terms kind of interchangeably because they're all part of the same thing. But what's the next step? I'm not encouraging this to happen because I think all of these things could be part of OD. But I think the next big thing is going to be OD&C and T. T standing for transforming organizations. And, in fact, I wrote an article published, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago about integrating OD and transformational leadership. So the first efforts at learning how to transform organizations actually came from this whole concept of transformational leadership, which has become very researched and pretty well known, but not necessarily well known by leaders. So the literature was great, and it showed the huge impact on performance and morale and satisfaction and all that when you have transformational leaders. But I noted in my article, in my research, that actually the transformational leadership people left out the most important part. They didn't really have anything on transformation. In other words, they did a great job of describing what a transformational leader is like and the impact they can have, but they didn't actually address the actual skills it takes to transform organizations. So guess where those skills come from? OD. We need to do way more research on that, but it always has been sort of part of our field. And so my guess is this is going to become the skill of the future for both leaders and practitioners. We have got to have the big picture perspective of how you transform organizations. And that's why I'm going to give you a case history of how Alan Mulally transformed Ford. So, Steve, see if anybody has any questions about that.
Nothing yet.
Okay. So the next one is who needs OD&C? And notice that I put leaders first, practitioners second, and change champions third, in that order. So one of my contributions, I hope, to this field is from the very beginning, I believe this was a field, not just for practitioners and academicians, but it was a field for leaders. Think of what we teach. It's exactly what leaders need to know how to do. They need to know how to bring out the best in people, teams, and organizations. And we focus on all those skills, how to transform an organization. And so my passion has been teaching this field to leaders. So these courses that I put together at my university that I've been teaching over the last 55 years are not actually designed for practitioners. My audience, for example, is all MBA students in our program. And I'm trying to reach them with the fundamental skills. They don't have to be experts in OD, but some of the fundamentals that we believe in are exactly what leaders need to do to be skilled leaders. And so that's the group I think we need to reach most. And in your training and development seminars you do, your education and teaching, I hope you're doing things not just for practitioners, but I hope you're trying to reach leaders. And of course, practitioners. This field has always been a little confused about what the field is and what kind of competencies that practitioners need. In fact, I can recall from the beginning of the time I got into the field, somebody was always talking about the death of OD because we can't really seem to define it. We don't seem to understand it. And so we need to do a better job of that so that we can prepare practitioners like your students, Steve, that are sitting in this room, so they really understand this field and what it's all about, and can be really good at it. And then the third group is what I call change champions. That's become a fairly common term, but actually I introduced it decades ago in saying that organizations need to develop change champions throughout the organization. In other words, they're not going to be as talented as practitioners, kind of official change agents, but anybody from top to bottom can learn enough about OD that they can be available anytime changes are needed so that they can lend their expertise and knowledge and concepts so that organizations can get quite good at managing change. So any questions about that one, Steve?
We have a couple comments here, Don.
Okay.
Let me see here. I'll just read a few. There's just two or three. In the 1960s, Don Cole and the OD Network came up with a definition of OD values and skills towards certification. But did you take this work into consideration? That's one question. Another one is OD scholar practitioner Juanita Brown and others were talking and writing about transformational change and transformational leadership back in the 90s. My impression, a lot of managers saw it as too squishy because not quantifiable. It was hard to sell, although people involved in experiential learning around it loved the experience but didn't know how to implement it. Hoping this presentation will give them some good guidance around implementation. And would love to hear Don's riff on what it is he believes we are changing and what is that needs to be changed.
Well, first, we've got this kind of struggle between practical OD and academic OD. And I think it's confused the learning process. If you're in academia, about the only way you can really get ahead is to publish in empirically driven journals. And so they're generating a lot of interesting information, but it's not necessarily things that especially leaders and OD practitioners can pick up and just practice. So kind of a general answer to this, we've got to get academic journals, and some are trying to do this, like the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science. They're trying to have a little bit more of the conceptual and not just empirical stuff that people are supposed to read. We've got to get more people that can write in ways that we understand the field and can practice it. And there's certainly been efforts like that with Don Cole and others. And there have been efforts even made a little about transformational leadership. But if you think about it, the only transformational leadership or transformational organization model that is widely used is John Cotter's model. And a lot of you are probably familiar. He came up with that in, 1990s or so, and it's still around, but that's about the only one that people cite. So we haven't been very good at being able to identify what the field is about. And Don Cole made a good point. Maybe we need to have certifications for people like they do in HR. So, but the problem is we haven't agreed exactly on what the field is so that we can certify people and send them out to practice at least some fundamental concepts. I don't know if that answered the question, but I'd be glad to clarify it more if it didn't.
I think it's good. Keep going. I think that's
Okay.
good.
Okay. So the next one is integrating the wisdom from the past with new thinking, concepts, and research, the folly of either or thinking. I don't know how many people have read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, but he had a great concept in there called the tyranny of the or. And it's interesting how many concepts we addressed in an either or way. Either has to be this way or that way. And he said, why don't we think about the excellence of the and that would expand our thinking. So what tends to happen in our field, at least from my point of view, is when somebody comes up with something new, the way they tend to promote it is to discount whatever happened in the past. And David would understand this because of all the controversy about action research. So as we get into appreciative inquiry and things like that, one of the ways to promote the new is to say, well, the old had all these problems, and so now we're presenting the new. And I guess what I'm saying is there is so much valuable wisdom from the past, and we shouldn't discount that. These new ideas and the old can join one another. They can be partners. They don't have to be contrary to one another. And you can identify yourself as many things. You can be a classic action research person and also use appreciative inquiry and dialogic OD. These things work really well, as you consider them all. So I'm just saying this to caution people. If you read things and they take action research and they say, well, it was just problem centered. And OD is about the future and being progressive, and that's not what we're about. It is just identifying problems and fixing them. Well, I don't remember action research being like that. Do you, David? I mean, the best people always focused not only on what needs to be corrected, but what's the future look like? What can we do to get there? And so I guess what I'm saying is open your mind to embracing the wisdom of the past. And then if there are some new things coming along, great. Try those as well. Boy, those of us that are in the past are way behind in the thinking about using technology, for example, in OD&C. So we all need to kind of learn from all of these perspectives. So any comments on that one, Steve?
I think it's affirming comments in general. When people talking about other periodicals such as Practicing Systems Change is another one that's good for practitioners, scholar practitioners. People talking about ACMP, Association for Change Management Professionals, and what role it's playing in impacting the field. And another saying the wisdom from the past informing new thinking is my purpose statement. The person said, this is Francis. And it's the art of applying this idea is to adapt that wisdom, not only to sustainable change, but also to build the capacity to continuously shift in relationship to needs and possibilities. And she just wanted to hear what were your thoughts on being agile? Like you're kind of suggesting being agile with the past and the present and the future.
Yeah, by the way, I know Frances, and she's a great example of somebody, I think, who has integrated the wisdom of the past with new ideas. So it's hard to do. I mean, it's hard for those of us who've been in the field a long time to adapt to this new, fast-moving, high-tech kind of environment, especially with AI now involved. There's a sharp learning curve, but we've all got to be willing to adapt. That's what we teach with organizations. We're trying to build organizations that can adapt to a world of just constant, accelerated, nonstop change. So I totally agree. I mean, this is all about us applying OD to us and adapting. Any other questions about that?
That's good. Keep going. Yeah, this is great.
Okay, so the next one, if you know reality, you can almost always do something about it. The illusion of doing well while the organization is regressing. Now, here's another tug of war in our field. Our field was built on assessing reality before we start treating what we think is reality. And everybody knows one of the big problems in organizations is you get leaders up at the top who think they know reality, they think they know what's going on, and they make decisions that are supposed to be implemented throughout the organization. And in many cases, they make no sense to the people who have to implement them. And we find leaders that get busier and busier and more out of touch with the realities of what's going on in their organization. I wrote an article one time, and it was titled "The Illusion of Doing Well While the Organization is Regressing." And it was a study I'd done of I think it was about 10 organizations I'd been working with. And I did this little assessment thing where in all of them, I would have them do a little survey. And part of the survey was to identify words and phrases that best describe your organization at this time. And they were kind of shocking. In the well-run organizations, they got the credit. We love working here. The leaders know what's going on. They value their people. They care about us and all that. But I had almost 2/3 of the comments were negative. They don't care about their people. It's all about the bottom line. They don't know anything about managing change. It just goes on and on. So I then wrote this article, "The Illusion of Doing Well While the Organization is Regressing," because so many leaders were up there thinking they knew what was going on, but in fact were detached from the realities. And depending on their leadership style, who's going to tell them the truth? And unless like Ann Edmondson out of Harvard talks so much about creating this environment where people can be open and truthful. That doesn't happen very often. So if you don't have that, they're just reinforcing to the leader his illusions or her illusions about what's going on. And so they're making decisions that are obviously going to have some very faulty outcomes. I've been called into organizations numerous times where the leaders had made a decision, and all over the country, the divisions were trying to implement them, and they made no sense whatsoever. And then I was kind of called in to help them kind of get things back in order. And I remember in one case, which kind of continued the illusion, was they committed to working so hard at making what the decisions wanted so that they could go back to doing what really worked. I don't know if you get the irony of that, but they kind of did what they had to do so that the leaders could check off, well, we did that. Boy, that really worked great. So they could go back to running the organization the way it really should be run. So here's one of the problems I'm trying to address here. In OD, there is a school of thought that really doesn't put much credit on our traditional skills of assessing reality. And keep in mind, in OD, that's a major contribution we've made, that before people treat problems or issues or challenges or opportunities, that they need to know reality. And if you know reality, you can almost do something about it. You can get people together and figure out the best ways to address things. But if you don't know reality and you get rid of our major contribution of assessing reality before deciding what we think it is and what to do about it, you're going to have a lot of problems. So I'm advocating strongly that we continue to believe what we've learned about assessing reality. And It's not just about identifying problems. Reality is about finding out what's possible and what we need to do to change, to be better, to be more effective. But assessment is one of our major skills. So we may do it in different ways. In today's times, we have a lot of technology that makes it possible, but don't throw out that wonderful concept we have of assessing reality. I will say, by the way, in the new thinking, especially the ones that are kind of dismissing the value of assessing reality, certainly when you assess reality, you want to involve people in dialoguing and evaluating that information and not assuming that a practitioner has all the knowledge, all the information, all the data, and so they can dictate what's supposed to be done. No, when you get data, you get the correct people involved to assess it, talk about it, evaluate it, and figure out how to best use it. Okay, any comments on that one?
Do you think this is from Rihanna, do you think that the focus and emphasis on the bottom line and ROI have increased in importance and emphasis over the course of your career? I ask because it seems that that way to me, it seems that way to me. I've been practicing OD&C since mid-80s. Seems to me there used to be more balanced values perspective, treat people, people and they will treat you well, quid pro quo, that kind of thing.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, but that's kind of a different issue. But OD was built on very strong values, very values driven, about treating people with respect and open communication and by the way, even the term now that has become political of diversity, do you realize that was an OD term? Things like diversity and inclusion, but it was meant to mean that we can get people with different perspectives together and in treating each other with respect to dialogue about issues. And so we can come out with the best solutions. So, we've always had this concept in the field, which I think is extremely valuable about assessing data, but we welcome people with different perspectives and sharing those ideas. I had an article published in what was it, Business Horizons a couple of years ago. I think it actually was in 2024. And it was about revisiting resistance to change and how to manage it. And the conclusion, of course, of all that is resistance is not a bad thing. Sometimes the so-called villains are really the heroes. They're speaking up about what reality really is, and we need to pay attention to them. And yes, when somebody's resisting to the point of disrupting the whole change process, that's not healthy. But by and large, we need to create an environment where people can have different perspectives and we hash them out by treating each other with respect, not shouting, to get our way or our agenda, but working together. That's, by the way, one of Alan Mullally's favorite terms is working together. If we work together, it creates a powerful force for change. Okay, want to go to the next slide?
Well, could I ask a question about that very specific topic? Is there any research that applies that specific statement to like American school districts? If you know reality, you can almost always do something about it. The illusion of doing well while the organization is regressing. I think a lot of school districts in America feel like they have to skew or manipulate their data to say that they're doing well. Do we know if there's any research from an OD perspective that can really speak to that?
I really, maybe Steve would know more than I do about that, or some of the rest of you. I don't know the specifics. I would guess that it's there. And by the way, that's a big problem, not just in school districts, but in every organization. Are we working to just fulfill somebody else's expectations for reporting and data or are we working for the good of the organization? Because organizations spend a lot of time generating information that are for required reports and that sort of thing, but probably aren't all that productive.
Right, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Plan change. Failing to plan is planning to fail. You've heard that term. And I put that in there because another controversy in our field. Some people don't really believe in plan change. They very astutely recognize that plan changes. Rarely do you ever plan out a change process that just stays the same the whole time. You have to constantly get feedback, adapt, and that sort of thing. But planning doesn't mean that you don't change things. I think, again, one of our major contributions is that before we change everything, that we actually do some planning. And we think about what it is we're trying to accomplish. What's the best way to get there? How do we build in feedback mechanisms to know what's working and not working? And how can we adapt when things change and we have to adapt with them? So plan change doesn't mean you can't change. You can't change the plan. We're always having to adapt. And all of you who've done any kind of OD or change program or whatever know rarely does it end up just the way it started. Things change along the way and you've got to adapt to them and adjust to them. So I know that some of my dear colleagues and people that are really dear friends of mine don't necessarily agree with this. They think it's much more about dynamic dialogue and that sort of thing, and you can't really plan changes. But I personally think if you don't plan, you're planning to fail.
Yeah, John, I would add that Billy Albin said once when I was talking about road mapping out large scale or change of scale. And people would argue, you can't make a roadmap. How can you? And there's two sides of that coin. So there's this notion of balancing those dilemmas or the paradoxes, the two opposing concepts that you have to like plan tight, hang loose concept. But she said to me, the best plans are meant to be deviated from. And then when you look at the project management literature out there, approaches, I should say, out there, Sean Otto is here, and he and I've been working on the concept that he's really leading the charge on this around agile OD&C, because there's waterfall approaches, which are approaches that kind of you lay out your plan and you work your plan exactly as prescribed. You just kind of step by step. And that's one approach that people argue doesn't work. And then there's the agile approach, which is, have your milestones, but delay making decisions till you have to, and keep things in the short term, and really focus on details in the short term and allow your plan to unfold as new information informs you, like through what they call sprints and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I like your term agile. And frankly, again, I think OD's always been like that for the best practitioners and in any field, you've got people who really practice it well and some who really don't. But for the best practitioners, the plans were always agile. You involve the appropriate people in the process. You listen to them. It's really fun, by the way, addressing change from an OD kind of perspective, where you may have in the same group planning changes an executive and somebody down at the bottom. They're all working together because they all bring something different. Hey, by the way, before we go to the next one, I think we skipped one about defining OD, didn't we? Can we go back to that one? There we go. I'm sorry, I missed this one. This is really critical. What is OD? And go back to the definition. It's probably the third or fourth slide, something like that. Keep going. There it is, right there. So here's what I did. I apologize that I skipped this. This is really critical. So what is it? Wouldn't it be interesting just for the people in the audience to have them all define OD and see what we got? And my guess is we get some very different perspectives. So here's what happened. All the way back in 1978, when I was the editor of the Academy of Management OD newsletter, I did this survey of leaders in the field and asked them a number of things, one of which was to define OD. And by the way, Richard Beckard, Warner Burke, Wendell French, Larry Greiner, Robert Tannenbaum, Edgar Schein. I mean, these were the pioneers in the field. And so I then published what they said. And then I did another study in 2003 with a wider group, because we had a lot of new people in the field then, like Tom Cummings and Gene Bartunek and Mike Beer and just a lot of newer people in the field, and asked them to do the same. And interestingly enough, the most popular definition was Richard Beckard's original definition. And here's what it was: an effort planned organization-wide and managed from the top to increase organizational effectiveness and health through planned interventions in the organization's processes using behavioral science knowledge. So anyway, I looked at all those definitions, both the original ones in the early study, the follow-on study, and then finally came up with a definition that I thought really integrated all of that thinking. Now, if you go back to Beckard, he uses the word planned, organization-wide. Well, that's changed. OD now is used at all levels of the organization. In fact, it's pretty rare for those of you that have been involved in OD that you actually get to do an organization-wide program. Managed from the top. Now we're recognizing it's really top-down, bottom-up. In other words, we're collaborating now to manage the change process. But here's a critical part. I think he nailed it on this. What's the purpose of OD? If you can get it down to two things, it's increasing organizational effectiveness and health. So we've got a performance side and a people side. And everything we do should be aimed towards those two things. Increasing the effectiveness or performance of a group and making it a healthier place to work where people can thrive. So whether you're trying to change the whole organization, a department, a team, and individuals, this is always our end goal. This is what we live for. It's what we work for. It drives everything that we do. So here's how then I defined it. Organization development is a planned and collaborative process. So it's, when we use the word organization, it could mean any part of the organization, the whole parts, department, team, or whatever, but it's a planned process and it's collaborative. We get people together to be involved in and engaged in planning the change process and implementing it. And what do? There's an understanding part where we assess reality, so we know reality before we treat what we assume is reality. So there's the understanding the organization, whether that's surveys or interviews or dialoguing with people or whatever, we try to find out what's really going on. Developing, so how do we improve it? And then how do we manage the change process so it has a high probability of success? If you've ever read the work of Robert Tannenbaum, you can effectively manage change in a way that has a high probability for success. And so what's our goal? To improve the health, effectiveness, and then I added, after going through all the definitions, self-renewing capabilities. So health, that's pretty clear. Effectiveness is pretty clear. Self-renewing capabilities mean that part of our job as OD people is to get people together to look at the future, figure out how we can continuously get better, be self-renewing, adapt to change, and so on. And so I hope that definition is helpful, but at least it helps me understand what OD is all about and what our mission is. So questions about that one?
No, I think Don, that's really good. I think people are interested, before we get into the ODC deep dive, if you could tell the Ford story a little bit more, if you still had a story to tell behind that. You said you wanted to talk about it. We have a few minutes, we can do that, because you've touched on a lot of the deep dive questions, but there's still, I want to go through them.
Okay.
Can you take a few minutes to tell your story, then we'll move into that next piece?
Okay, so go to the second slide for a minute. I'll just quickly point out what's left on there. Go to the next one, next slide. Okay, plan change, and there is a model, by the way, for plan change, and it's a play off of the Lewin's original model, but updated. So take a look at that. And what I'm saying, we don't need a specific detailed model, because when you manage change, it's a dynamic process, moving back and forth and changing and so on. But if you have a big picture perspective, that's what I'm looking for. So you got to prepare for change, you got to implement it and manage it, and then you got to transition it so it's likely to last. Now, the next one says the critical role of transformational leaders, and this is getting to the Mullally thing. I think maybe the most important thing we can do in OD is actually develop transformational leaders. I mean, what if in an organization you work with, you only were able to train the CEO in transformational leadership? That alone would make a huge difference. What if you could train all of his or her leadership team in transformational leadership? What if you could train people throughout the organization in transformational leadership? If they understand that, then you can plan and manage change quite effectively. Just a quick one on these last two, and then I'll get to that model. Understanding the difference in experiential and action team building. It's interesting. If you mention the word team building, what do people think of? They think of experiential exercises. We're going to do trust falls, and we're going to do this and this, and why are we doing all this stuff? That's experiential team building. It is good, by the way, for building concepts and collaboration. Action team building is what we really do best, where we actually work with a team to clarify their mission, responsibilities, goals, and so on. Now, we get down to this whole idea of transforming organizations. I'm convinced this is going to be the most important skill in the future for anybody involved in OD. And so if you go near to the last slide or so, it tells what I did with Alan Mullally. And so I'll just give a quick overview, and if anybody wants to go back, they can get the slides and see the details. Keep going. Now, wait a minute, go back to that. Here's what I would encourage all of the audience to do. Would you contact me and help me define transformational OD? I'm trying to come up with a new term, by the way. And I'm defining it as the process of using skilled leaders and being effective at managing the change process and using sound principles for transforming organizations. That's a contribution we can make that is extremely valuable in today's times. But Steve read that, and he pointed out a few things that probably need to be changed about it. But if you would, I would love for people in the audience to send me some ideas about defining, maybe together we can create a new term called transformational OD. Now, go to the last one. Okay, so here's what Alan Mullally did. And maybe I'll encourage you to go back and look at all the details of those slides. But he just had this amazing ability. And he's not necessarily trained in OD, but since what we do in reality is state-of-the-art common sense, as a leader, with all of his background and leadership and so on, he understood how to transform an organization. in a way that never had been done for a large company like that. Now, just to give you the background of the story, when he was, by the way, CEO of Boeing. And while he was there, by the way, they were quite successful. Then they asked him to be the CEO of Ford. So he went from planes to automobiles, and he did it because he was such a strong believer in the need for companies like Ford to survive. They were literally months away from bankruptcy and had just lost $17 billion. So what's his incentive? He's been very successful. And now he goes in to take over a situation that's almost impossible. I call it mission impossible in the article. And he turns them around. And they become the most successful automobile company in the United States and one of the most profitable in the entire world. And he did that over a period of about 3 to 5 years. And what he did when in all the interview, Alan and I have talked about this many times, and then I tried to put it in print what he did. And it's really OD and transformational leadership integrated into one. And so you can see how he did a great job of finding out reality. He went all over Ford. He talked to consultants. He talked to board members. He talked to people at all levels of Ford. He went to dealers. He knew reality. He then demonstrated this passion for transformational leadership that was just compelling to people. He went to work every day with a smile. He loved talking about the future of Ford and what was possible. And then he put together a principled and skilled leadership team. When you get the leaders working together with very clear goals for how to transform the organization, you've got a powerful force that begins to work through the whole organization of, in this case, hundreds of thousands of people. Then he had he built an action-oriented, working together culture that was very resilient and very clear about what he wanted the culture to be, defined by the leadership team and others throughout the organization they involved, what kind of culture it was going to take to turn the company around. Then go to the next slide. And this is a critical one. Effectively manage the change process. And by the way, he got everything down into very simple terms. He created one card, the size of a calling card, with a vision, mission, and expected behaviors of employees throughout Ford. Got that all on a little calling card. And his vision was one Ford. How do we bring the whole thing together with us all working together for a strategy for success that we all understand? He was very transparent and truthful about what was working, what was not working. If things were working, he used it then to compliment people and encourage people. If it was not working, then shared that as well and what we needed to do to turn things around. He created opportunities for open, safe, two-way communications. In other words, it wasn't just that he was open himself. When you're at that level, I don't care how open you are, some people are going to tell you what you want to hear. So he did all kinds of surveys of people, focus groups and that sort of thing. So he always had a finger on the pulse of what was really going on, what was working and not working. And he took a systems approach, again, a classic OD thing, looking at the big picture and how everything is working together so you can align everything to reinforce the desired changes, and then hit the last two. Go to the next slide. And then he accelerated the transformation process by rewarding the right behaviors, going around the company, encouraging people, telling them the changes that are being made, the progress that's being made. And finally, not only did they deliver results, but he created a culture where when things went wrong, he told them, look, in transforming Ford, we're going to make mistakes. We're not always going to make the right decisions. Things are going to go wrong that we never expected. What are we going to do in those? We're going to collaborate. We're going to get the right people together, figure out what we need to do. And with all this, he kept a momentum going that was unprecedented. So how's that?
That's great, John. Thank you. One question, then I'm going to transition
Okay.
over. One person asked, well, you said Lewin was right, sort of.
Had what?
Lewin was right, sort of. You said Lewin was right, sort of.
Oh, Lewin. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Lewin's model, the unfreezing movement, refreezing, the terms I don't think necessarily fit for today's times, but that 3-stage process for change, I think is classic. I don't care whether you're changing individuals or a whole organization. There's a preparation stage, there's an implementation stage, and there's a transition stage. And once you get people to understand that, they can manage the change process fairly effectively. I use the same model for coaching people on how they can work with others to help them change. There's a cognitive change, a change in thinking and awareness and that sort of thing. There's a behavioral change where you practice new behaviors until they become habits. And so I think his model was just classic.
Yeah, thank you, Don. All right, so let's jump into the deep dive. And
Okay.
And so you're going to be really challenged with these questions because you're going to want to talk for probably an hour on each one. All right, so what I'm going to ask you to do, and you've touched on a lot of this, I'm going to ask you to give me just think of it a lightning round, like in those sports shows where they have only a few minutes and they ask a question and they bullet answer all of them and they try to go through it. Think of it like that. But I'm just going to ask you to give me top of mind things that come to you in each of the areas. You can always, you got the questions, so I'm going to ask you to also, you can send it later more, because we're going to be content thematically analyzing all of this. We're going to be interviewing a lot of people, not just on the series, but outside of it, around these questions. And so you've given us definitions and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to ask you top of mind just to state the key things or the key points that come up for you. The first area is defining the field. We already talked about it. However,
I think they're in the.
Go ahead.
I think they're in the definition: planning, collaboration,
Right.
understanding the organization. The goal is effectiveness, health, and self-renewing capabilities.
How has that shifted over time?
I don't think it has. I think the environment in which you apply it has shifted dramatically. The principles, I think, are the same.
Cool. And what is the key thing, if you were to boil it down, what makes OD&C different from everything else? You said it at the beginning, but just say it one more time. What makes OD&C different from other professions and maybe other human-centered professions like HR, training and development, IO psychology? What makes OD&C different?
I think if you really understand OD, we're in the business of building healthy, effective organizations. And that's what we do, whether it's the whole organization, a department, a team, helping individuals perform better. That's what we do best.
Is there anything in the way OD&C does it that makes it different from others? The way it achieves that?
Well, of course, it's very values driven, and that's important. That we may do different OD, we may do OD different depending on who we are, what our skills are, but our values should be pretty much the same. We believe in treating everybody with respect, in involving, in engaging and including people, in doing what's best both for the organization and the people in it and the customers they serve. So I think those values really set us apart.
Gotcha. All right, so let's move to influential figures. Who are the key historical figures and thinkers that anchor the field, and particularly that influence you?
Okay. Well, of course, you've got the original pioneers, the Richard Beckards, the Robert Blakes and Jane Moutons, the Edgar Scheins, the Warren Bennis's, and those kind. What also has influenced me is the great textbooks that actually have been written on OD, starting with French and Bell, and then, of course, Warner Burke, Cummings and Worley, and frankly, one that isn't talked about much, but I think is maybe one of the best of all, is by Don Anderson. So you may want to look his up. He did a wonderful job. So there's so many contributors. I think a lot of specialists like David Codlin on action research, certainly Marshak and Bush on dialogic OD, David Cooperrider, appreciative inquiry. So those are people that stand out.
Yeah. Are there any current or emerging people that you like that you're seeing?
I think Steve Cady is one. Everybody hear that? I think Steve Cady is probably more knowledgeable about what's going on in OD than maybe anybody on the planet right now. I think certainly, Gene Bartunuk's had a big influence. Gavin Swartz, who is the editor of Jabs, Gretchen Spreitzer, I think that's how she said it, was former director of the OD division of the Academy of Management. So there are some really good people coming up in the field.
Great. So I guess next question for you. What are your favorite model, a framework that you visually see, circles, diagrams, flow charts, or tools, but really your favorites. What are some of your favorite go-to ones that you love?
Okay, I would say versions of Lewin's model of change. David, you'll love this. I think action research, that's one of our hallmarks that David specializes in. The concept of how you do things is as important as what you do. And boy, that affects so many things. Systems thinking, the whole idea of transforming organizations, and something I've written a lot about is developing change champions.
Gotcha. All right, so let's move to a fun one, because this has really actually been quite interesting to ask this question about competencies for practitioners, but what are competencies of scholars, right? So if you could start, what would be your top few most important competencies for practitioners? And then what are your competencies for scholars in the field of OD&C?
Okay. Well, I actually wrote an article on this one time, did a survey about competencies, and here's what I had: 4 things. One is knowing. I think you need to be well informed about OD. And by the way, I think the fastest way to do that is you get maybe 3 of the basic textbooks, like Cummings and Worley, Anderson, and so on. You subscribe to the OD newsletter and maybe a couple of the journals, like OD Journal or Jabs, those sort of things. So there's the knowing part. Conceptualizing, that's planning changes. So I think to do that, you have to have a model, probably like Lewin's or something else, so that you have a logical way to plan changes. Consultation, that's doing. So you got to develop skills. So we have a lot of skills, that we teach in OD, like how to build healthy, high-performing teams, like how to help leaders establish a vision, mission, core values, and goals. There's so many skills, and with your doctorate group they're learning a boatload of skills. I'm sure that. So that's the doing part. And then probably the most important part is the being part. So I've got his knowing, conceptualizing, consultation skills. That's the doing. And then the being. And in this thing I did with Alan Mullally, one of his major contributions to transforming organizations is his focus on character. He said character drives change as much as what you do. In other words, who you are drives change as much as what you do. And if your character merits following, it greatly accelerates the change process. If people are skeptical about your character, it slows everything down. And so I think maybe it's just part of our training, but I meet so many people in OD that are just fine, wonderful people. I mean, they treat people with value and respect. They share what they know. They want to help organizations and people be better and do better. They write, train, educate, consult to make all that happen. And so I think being is probably the best of all. And being a person that people can trust, that creates openness and open dialogue where people can disagree with you, question things, and you can communicate with one another. That's what I'm teaching my students today is probably the most important. It's important what you do. It's even more important who you are.
Great. So tell me say a little bit more about scholars.
Okay, so but that's a tricky one.
Right. So if you were to be speaking to scholars that are going to be helping to advance the field, what would you hope would be their competencies?
Yeah, of course they've got to be competent in modern day research, which is really complex. And unfortunately, it drives doing things that probably aren't going to have a whole lot of application, but gets them published in top tier journals. That's really hard. So I would encourage them to find a few journals, like JABS, Business Horizons, of course, big time like Harvard Business Review and things like that, but ones that actually value practice and translating knowledge to things people can actually do and have the courage to do that. And you may be, to some degree, jeopardizing your career, because what's going to be valued if you're an academician is this empirical work that gets in top tier journals that mostly is read by other academicians and rarely reaches the eyes of a practitioner, a leader, a scholar. I mean, a practitioner, leader.
That is good. And so anything else you would say that you would want scholars to do, be able to do in the field? The key that makes an OD&C scholar successful?
I don't know if I want to encourage others to do, what I set out to do, but to be able to study, what's written out there is great research on all the dynamics of change and resistance to change and all these kind of things. But to be able to translate that to practice so that people can use that valuable information that's being generated, but may not be communicated in a way that they can use. So it's hard work to take data that's been collected and translate it to practice. But that's what I would encourage them to do.
Great. All right, so we got moving to wrapping up. So now, as we think about the foundations, you've talked about a couple books and so forth. What would be some additional books or articles that you would really love to make sure people had on their bookshelf, or that they had access to?
You mean that I would do?
Yeah, what books or articles would you want to make sure, if you only had a small set? Well, you already said the books you want people to read. Are there any other books you would add, or are there any articles that people, like a classic, that people need to read?
Yeah, well, the new one that's going to be in the OD journal, that's got a model for transforming organization with stories behind it for actual things that Mullally did. And I hope it's a good article. I mean, I would sure encourage people to do that. But just so you would know, based on what I just discussed, I started with a tier 1 journal. They wouldn't take it, wasn't empirical enough. I went to a tier 2 journal and they liked it, but they'd want all kinds of changes to make it more empirical. And I just wasn't willing to do that. So I went to a tier 3, which probably was the best place to begin with, because it is going to practitioners and leaders. It's tough for academicians today, as you well know, and anybody who's in academia.
Okay, cool. So now let's go to the last piece. This is sort of our closing, because you've really talked about this. What is your highest aspiration for the field of OD&C?
Yeah, the highest aspiration, first of all, is for me to reach leaders. And I take every opportunity I can find to speak to leaders and share with them OD concepts that they can use. Secondly, is to develop change champions. And I'm doing that in my classes. I had to fill out something the other day, and I figured out that I've had somewhere around 10,000 students and talked to way over 10,000 audiences with leaders and so on. And so I've tried to reach my students so they leave my classroom committed to making a difference. And they have the fundamental skills of a change champion so that if they champion change or are involved in it, they can contribute to that process to make it better. So I'm just trying to reach.
David Bright says that he thinks that's a different question than what is the highest aspiration of the field. Your aspiration versus
mine. Well,
no, of course, he says there's a difference between your aspiration or the field's aspiration.
Yeah.
Is there a distinction there for you, and what is that?
Yeah. Well, for the field, I think it's to develop skills in bringing out the best in people, teams, and organizations. That's what we're all about. We create organizations where people can flourish, be better at what they do, have a culture to work in that brings out the best in them. We try to build healthy, high-performance teams and teamwork where the teams are all working together. And we try to build these organizations that not only can get great results, but are a great place to work and do business with.
Yeah, and so as you think about that, when you think about that, what are the specific impacts or outcomes from achieving that aspiration? What would be some specific? Think of it like the dependent variable. You know, what are going to be the specific outcomes if the aspiration is achieved? What would tell you that?
Probably the simple way is to say it creates a win-win situation. The organization gets better results. Teams work together far more effectively and are much more innovative. And people are utilizing far more of their potential and getting to enjoy being at work, which is becoming more and more toxic. So you can find those things out, by the way. You can survey people, you can interview people. There are some specific measures you can keep on morale, on performance and that sort of thing. And by the way, that's one of the things you'll see in the article. That's what Mullally did. He had measures for all of those levels, organizations, teams, and individuals.
All right, last is what role can the field play, OD&C, in the future of our people, teams, organizations, and society? What role can the field play?
I mean, we're a game changer. I just hope, by the way, I apologize for having to talk so long. I'm not a real believer in having a kind of class where I just talk. I would much rather have heard from the people in the audience. So I do apologize for that. But I hope if you took nothing away from this session, that you go out with a passion for what you do and you're going to make a difference. And you can make a difference, by the way, whether you're given opportunities to work at an organization, team, or individual level, just by who you are. I mean, if you're a person who goes to work and you care about other people and you look for ways to bring out the best in them and you recognize and encourage people, you're going to impact at least the people in your arena. And you can make a difference, whether you can impact the whole organization, department, team, or just some people, but you can make a difference.
Awesome. Well, everybody, round of applause for Don. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. It's time to wrap up. I just really love your enthusiasm. Like I said, you're the ever-ready buddy for the field of OD&C. And for everybody here, thank you for coming. It's time for those of us here to go grab some lunch, and for all of you to have a great rest of your day. So Don, thank you so much from here at Bowling Green State University, from Nexus for Change, from the OD&C division at the Academy, and hopefully we'll have some other partners joining us, because we have a lot of people that want to be a part of this fun conversation. So thank you, Don. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.